for many months now, we have been anticipating exactly how we can get our PCs to be up to spec in preparation for the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. Today, Microsoft has finally shared with us exactly the minimum specifications, the recommended specifications, as well as the ideal specifications to be able to get the most out of Microsoft Flight Simulator. In this video, we're going to take a look at exactly what those specs mean and roughly how much those types of PCs would cost you. So let's start off with the minimum specification. So on the table provided by Microsoft, we have both AMD and Nvidia specifications. Now of course you may have a mix of Ryzen CPUs and Nvidia graphics card and vice versa as well. However, for simplicity, let's just assume you have all AMD or you have all Nvidia equipment. Now, irrespective of whichever specification you think your PC may be suitable for, it's worth noting that you must have the Windows 10 November 2019 update, so that is version 1909 of Windows 10. That applies across the range, irrespective of whether you have the minimum specification or the ideal specification. Before we talk about the CPU, the GPU and the RAM, let's talk about other things that are somewhat common across all specifications. So let's start with the hard drive space you're going to need on your PC. So irrespective of whether you're going for the minimum or the ideal spec, you must have 150 gigabytes free on one of your hard drives. Now, according to this specification sheet, whether you have minimum or recommended, you can use a HDD, that's absolutely fine. However, ideally, you will be having a SSD with 150 gigabytes free. Now this doesn't include any potential add-ons in the future, this is just for the base simulator itself. Another common specification we should take a look at is bandwidth. Now bandwidth is incredibly important in this sim, as it will be streaming data constantly into your simulator to provide that gorgeous satellite imagery and author imagery that we have seen through various screenshots and videos. Now, before you worry too much about the specs, don't forget there is still an offline mode, but the detail you will expect to see will not be quite as good as what you've seen in the imagery beforehand. It also means you won't be able to fly online, and also some other technical limitations may be applied as well. The good news, however, is that for a minimum specification, the bandwidth requirements is only 5 megabytes per second. So those on slower internet connections don't need to worry as much, and I believe this is a download specification only, not necessarily an upload specification. Recommended is 20 Mbps, and for those looking for the ideal system, then a 50 megabytes per second download speed is what you need to be aiming to get. Now you can find out exactly how fast your internet is by going to Google, for example, and typing in speed test and running a speed test there, and it will give you roughly what your current bandwidth requirements are. So with those things out the way, we can now focus on the more technical side of things about what gives you that raw performance in the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. So let's start with the CPU. Now on a minimum specification side of things, it's saying that for an AMD processor you need a Ryzen 3 1200, or if you're using Nvidia stuff, then an Intel i5 4460. Now both of those are not exactly demanding CPUs and are moderately priced for actually the performance that you get. Now with anything, you do need to combine that with a GPU, and in this case for the minimum specification, a Radeon RX 570 or an Nvidia GTX 770 will be sufficient. Now again, this is minimum specification, so you're probably not going to get the same visual eye candy and performance as what you've seen in the screenshots, just to set your expectation. The good news is, for those who may have concerns about VRAM, the minimum specification is only 2 GB, with RAM being 8 GB. Many of you will probably want to avoid the minimum specifications because you're not going to get that same level of performance and eye candy as what you've seen through the screenshots and videos, and you certainly wouldn't be able to run it in 4K as what you've seen previously as well. If you're looking to have better frames, better performance, then you're going to want to head towards the minimum specification, or ideally the ideal specification. Now, if you're looking for the recommended spec, the CPU is again somewhat modest compared to other platforms and games that we've seen released in the past. So you will need a Ryzen 5 1500X, or if you're in the Nvidia market, then ideally you'd like to look at the Intel i5 8400. In terms of the GPUs, the Radeon RX 590 or the Nvidia GTX 970. Again, both of those cards were released a few years ago and are somewhat cheap. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to buy those cards specifically, but again, it's great to know that if you do have some slightly older hardware, you're still going to be able to run Microsoft Flight Simulator under the recommended specifications. Again, the VRAM is 4GB, so twice what it was from the minimum spec, and the recommended RAM memory usage is 16GB. So again, those are not figures or numbers too far outlandish from what we are currently potentially using in our PCs today if you're already using PCs for Prepared or for Laminar Research's X-Plane 11. Now, moving on to the higher end of the spectrum, the ideal specification. Of course, this is where those 4K 60 frames per second videos and screenshots are coming from Microsoft and other testers. You'll need the Ryzen 7 Pro 2700X or the Intel i7 9800X CPU. Now, those are some of the most powerful and the latest components you can get today, and as a result do cost quite a pretty penny. The same with the GPU, you'll need the Radeon 12 or the Nvidia RTX 2080. Now, that's not to say that it takes full support of ray tracing, which is what those graphics cards are known to do. However, it does give you that extra VRAM, and it also gives you that extra power to be able to produce those solid frame rates and 4K specifications. In terms of VRAM, 8GB is where you're looking at here, and in terms of RAM, this is where it really ramps up in comparison to the other specifications, and it's saying that the ideal specification is 32GB of RAM. Now again, we don't know what performance will be like on each specification in terms of what you would get in terms of frame rates, in terms of resolution. However, this is the first time we've been able to compare exactly what specifications we would need to run the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. So there you have it, the first ever look at the Microsoft Flight Simulator specifications. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. Does your PC currently meet these specifications? If so, whereabouts does it fit? And what are your expectations in terms of performance, frame rates and resolution? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. But that's everything from me today. Have a fantastic week and we'll speak to you again soon.